Hey everyone, I want to say a big thank you for all the questions and the comments and the response I got to the previous video about these Q&As. I posted that video across the social media platforms and I've got a big long list of comments, questions and topics to talk about. So I'm just going to go through and start answering them. I'm going to try and keep the videos to around 10 minutes I think, so I'll just keep an eye on the time and we'll see how we go from there. So let's get to it. Okay, so here's a question from Mark on YouTube. And Mark says, "Hey Remi, keep up the great work. I have my own picking technique which I like a great deal. I can see that gypsy picking would open up a new direction or more flexibility with what I can play. My question is, did you struggle at all to implement this technique? Every time I tune into it, I fall back to my style. I guess I just need to focus more and have more patience." Yes, there was a period of about, I would say, 2 to 2.5 years of a transition period where I went from, feeling very uncomfortable with the rest stroke gypsy jazz style technique to it feeling normal and my kind of new kind of default picking technique. When I first started playing gypsy jazz, I didn't use the technique. I just carried over what I'd had from playing guitar previously, which was kind of an alternate picking style, I guess. And after maybe a couple of years of studying kind of gypsy jazz and gypsy jazz players and transcribing and watching videos and stuff, I started to see the advantages of the rest stroke technique, and I decided it was something I was going to adapt into my playing. And then from that moment, it took maybe 2 to 2.5 years, I would say, for it to feel normal and feel comfortable. The thing I found the hardest was the double downstroke. I think that's what most people find the trickiest with this technique, is when you're descending and you have a double downstroke on 2 strings going this direction, going up. And kind of getting that to the point where you don't pull the time or slow down on the notes that are picked double down. That can be tricky, and it just took lots of practice, lots of time, and gradually it starts to get easier. The one thing I should say though is it's not essential. You don't have to learn this picking technique. There are lots of great players who don't use this technique. One of my favourite gypsy jazz style players is Gary Potter. He doesn't use the gypsy jazz rest stroke picking technique, but I would never ever advise him to change what he does because he's amazing. So it might open up certain stylistic doors to certain kind of phrases and things within the gypsy jazz guitar playing style, but it won't make you a better musician really. It might just make certain things, it might make executing certain phrases, patterns, licks and stuff, might make that process a bit easier once you've overcome the initial kind of period of transition. But yeah, don't feel pressure to learn it if it feels really unnatural, and if you're really happy with the way you play already, I wouldn't be too keen to change what you already have unless you're really, really sure that it was going to make a difference to your playing. Maybe just try a couple of licks here and there and just see how you get on with it, rather than feeling like you have to kind of rub out everything that you've already got and then replace it with the rest stroke technique. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to ask me anything else anytime. Here's a question from George on YouTube. George says, "Hi Remi, thanks for doing this. I would like to know, how do you visualize chords and scales in the fretboard? If you use some kind of cage system, and if you are thinking all the time in the name of the chord you are playing, or only visualize shapes changing? Thank you." Yeah, so I've covered this topic quite in detail on a video that's on my channel called "What Scales Do I Use?" But so if you want a really in-depth explanation of this, check that video out. But in short, I think of music on the fingerboard in terms of chord tones. That's what my primary kind of visualization is. So it's what chord I'm on, and it's a 1, 3, 5, you know, a 2, a 1, you know, a 7, 6, etc., etc. And then of course the in-between notes as well, 5, flat 5 or sharp 4, 4, 3, flat 3 or sharp 9. So that's how I think when I play. So it's what chord I'm on, and it's the note in relation to that chord. Now of course scales do fit in with this as well, because scales are essentially collections of notes that work over chords. At least that's one way of looking at them. So a major scale is included in that, but so are the other notes. Flat 9, you know, the sharp 5, etc., etc. And I also visualize the notes not only based on the chord you're on at that given moment, but also the chords around that chord. So perhaps the next chord in the sequence, the next 2 chords in the sequence, and sometimes even the home key as well. So for example, if you do a 1, 6, 2, 5 in the key of D, you could take this note, which is the 3rd of D. It's the 5th of B minor, the 6th. It's the 9th of the 2. It's the 13th of the 5. And so knowing that gives you a good awareness of the individual notes. You know, for example, that note works throughout all the chords, so it's one you can base, you can keep coming back to. Whereas some other notes don't do that, you know. So it's kind of like trying to be aware basically of what all the notes do in relation to the chord they're on and the musical situation you're in. So like for example 2-5-1, that's a common musical situation, so knowing how these notes work throughout the sequence, not just on the isolated chord, that will allow you to create lines that move and weave between chords. So that's kind of how I visualize notes. But yeah, I speak a little bit more in depth on this topic on my video, what scales do I use. It should be easy to find on the channel, but let us know if you can't find it or if you have any more questions. Okay, so here's a question from Instagram. This is from Anku Sounds. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'd love to get back to playing gypsy jazz again. Where do I start? Perhaps rhythm strums and chord progressions first. Yes, yeah, I definitely recommend doing rhythm first. Yeah, learning chord sequences, learning how to play gypsy jazz rhythm style. I've got a video on my YouTube channel called Rhythm Guitar My Approach, I think it was called, where I talk a little bit about how I approach rhythm guitar, but there are lots of approaches with gypsy jazz rhythm playing. But certainly you want to do that before you start playing lead, because learning to accompany someone is really, really important for a start, but also none of the lead stuff makes sense unless you understand the chord sequences underneath. So yeah, I would start with some good chord progressions, some standards, learn whole standards like minor swing, coquette, honeysuckle rose, maybe all of me, autumn leaves, some of these kind of jazz and gypsy jazz standards that aren't too tricky or too complex with key changes and stuff. Start with that, and the earlier you can, start playing with people. Maybe if there are people you can go and jam with, or perhaps sit in with, that's really good for you, or find someone who's also trying to learn the style. But other than that, you can play along with things, backing tracks on YouTube, recordings and stuff like that, just to get a feel for the music. And then, yeah, once you've got a few standards under your belt, then start maybe thinking about learning melodies to the songs, and then finally start learning some solos and some phrases, licks, lines, that kind of thing, and start improvising. So yeah, good luck with it. Okay, so we'll do one more in this video, and this one's from John on YouTube, and he says, do you enjoy talking to the camera? I've tried it a couple of times, but it's such a peculiar process, just sitting there talking to oneself. Feels really odd. I have no problem standing before an audience, giving software demonstrations, etc., and talking about our products, but doing it to a camera and nobody else just feels really odd. So how about you? Really interested to know the mindset you put yourself in. Yeah, so it is very strange actually. It's not something I'm completely comfortable with, if I'm honest with you. It's something I find the more I do, the easier it becomes. But definitely a strange feeling when you're not used to it. I remember the first ever tutorial video I did was just a lick video. It was a number of years ago. It's on my YouTube channel somewhere. And it took me ages to get a kind of a take, because it just felt so strange. And actually growing up, public speaking was my biggest kind of fear really, and I didn't actually have to do it when I was growing up, because I was always the guitar player in a band, but we always had a singer. But once I started playing jazz and gypsy jazz, I found myself fronting the group, and so I had to address the audience. And for the first few years, I'd just pick up the mic and I just go, thank you, and that was minor swing, and this one is all of me, and just put the mic down. And it was really, really awkward and terrifying actually. But gradually over time I felt more confident with it, and speaking in front of an audience is something I actually feel very relaxed about. But speaking in front of a camera is still something I'm trying to get better at, and hopefully making these videos helps that out. So yeah, I guess it's a bit like anything really. The more you do it, you break through that kind of uncomfortable period, and then hopefully you improve, and you just gradually get better at it. So hopefully some of you found that interesting and maybe learnt something. I've got loads more questions. I think I managed to get 4 questions in there. So I've got a massive, huge list of questions here. So I'm going to keep making them. I've got to go off and do a few jobs now, but I'll come back to this in a couple of days. Feel free to keep asking questions, and I'll just keep making the videos. So see you next time.